Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and in this tutorial we're going to look at querying databases in Android Java. So at the moment, so far, I've created this database class for handling all my database stuff, which extends the SQLite Open Helper, and it's got this method store points, which can store the list of points that we pass to it. Or you could store anything in here, of course, strings or text or whatever you like. And we've provided this, we've overridden, actually we've implemented the SQLite Open Helper method, because this is an abstract class, on create. And in there we put some code to create the database, and that will be called automatically when we do something like calling get writable database. So once we've implemented that, we don't have to worry about calling it anywhere. We just go ahead and use the database, which is really nice. And now I'm going to add a method for retrieving the data from the database, and then we can have a look at it and see that it really has been stored. So I'm going to call this public. It's going to return a list of points, since that's what my database deals with in this case. And I'll call it get points. And let's just add the import there for list, and I'm going to have a list of points that I'm going to return. Let's call it points and set that equal to a new array list of point objects. This is Android point objects, 2D points. And we've seen that to write to the database you need to call get writable database. And that's a method, of course, of the SQLite Open Helper class, and that enables you to do stuff like deleting stuff from the database and inserting stuff into the database, or of course updating it. And in this case what I'm going to do is I'm going to query the database, so I'm going to call get readable database, and that returns once again a SQLite database object. So I'll type SQLite database db equals, and so that I don't forget, I'm going to call db.close already, and in between there I'm going to have some code that queries the database. So I need some code to query the database with, and I'm going to say string SQL equals string.format, because here I'm going to want to use some column names, although in fact probably only one column, come to think of it. But I'm going to have in here select star from and then I need the table name %s. I'll put for the moment select star from %s, and let's have order by %s, and that's going to be another column. And the columns here, well, the things that I'm going to substitute here are going to be the table name. I have my constant defined up here, points table. So let's specify that for the table name and points table. And for the last argument, the one that I want to order by, that's going to be my ID column. So I'm going to use this col ID static string here. So call ID, there we go. So that's going to select all the columns from my database ordered by their ID. So I should get the points in the order that they're entered, since I was incrementing the ID starting at 0 every time I added a point. And now in the middle here, so I'm going to say db.raw query, and I'm going to pass in the SQL there, and the selection args here I'm going to set to null, like this, and that actually returns a cursor. So I'm going to say cursor equals db.raw query, passing my SQL. Let's add the import there with Control Shift and O. And now I can say while cursor dot move to next. Cursor dot move to next. There we go. So let's just expand the editor. So the idea is that you have this cursor which kind of points at the latest result, and when you first do the query, the cursor points before the first result. So you call move to next to point it to the first row that you want to retrieve, and then you keep calling move to next to move to the next row and the next, and so on. And every time I do this, I want to retrieve some values. So I want to say cursor dot get, and the values that I've stored in my database are all going to be actually integers. So I'm going to say get int, and the column indexes here are 0 based. So I'm going to type 0, and that should get me my x coordinate, int x equals, and then I'm going to say y here, and that'll be column 1. And in fact it may even be, maybe it's clearer here if I actually use the actual column names here, which I certainly could do. So I could put col x and col y, where are we? Like this. Okay, so that's the first column I'm retrieving, and then the second column, and that corresponds to index 0 and index 1. And once I've got that data back, I'm going to say points. So I'm just going to add that to my list of points that I want to return, and say points.add new point x comma y. And then finally I of course close the database down here, and then I can return my array list of points. Now to check that this works, I'm going to go to image activity here, and when I've got 4 points, this code is invoked, you may recall, and I store the points in my database. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say db dot get points. So I'm going to call that method that I just retrieved, that I just defined, the method that I just wrote, and I'm going to say here list. In fact, yeah, I don't have any list of points in here defined, so I'll call it points. List point. I was just wondering if this name would conflict with something I already had, but of course it doesn't, because that's in a different class. List point, list of point objects, points equals db.getPoints, and let's see what the error is here. Duplicate local variable points. Oh yeah, I was wrong, it conflicts with this variable here. I was completely forgetting. Well, let's call this something different. I'll just call it list for the moment. This is temporary code that we're going to get rid of later, so I won't worry too much. And let's say 4 points in list. I just want to have a check that this works, and I'm going to say here log.d and main activity dot debug tag, and the message here I'm going to have string.format, and I'm just going to say in here got point and %d, %d, and let's pass in for the arguments here. Let's pass in point.x and point.y, referring to the point here, this variable here. I'll just do Ctrl-Shift-F to format that a bit, and that looks okay. And now, so if all this works, what should happen is when I click 4 points on my image, it invokes this code here, and then it will store the points, and then it will retrieve them immediately and display them in the logcat debug output. And the methods that I'm calling are the ones that I've defined in my database class here, store points and get points. So let's just check that. Let's minimize this editor and click run to run it. And again, we could easily have errors because it is hard to write code like this and get every little detail right first time, but we'll see. and so it's uploading, and I'm going to go in a minute to DDMS so that I can see my debug output. Installing, and let's hope we see success. There we see success. I'll go to DDMS and I'll clear the output here and go to my emulator, get rid of this dialog, which is not normally going to appear. It's just here because I'm building the screen that stores the points for the moment. I'll click 4 points, and when I click the fourth, it stores them in my database, and fairly quickly it retrieves them again and tells me what they were. So this code seems to be working, and that's it for the moment. So I think that's all the database stuff we need just for a minute, but I'm going to refine this a bit more because at the moment the database code is executing in the main GUI thread and potentially holding it up, and for that reason we're going to move on to look at running asynchronous processes. So join me again next time, and until then, happy coding.